A gentleman with the name of Jim, no pun intended, but also no need to mention his last name, leased the ranch across the river from me, from Driekloof, and the rancher's name was Hagdoorn. Jim hailed from Zimbabwe, excuse me, Jim hailed from Rhodesia. And we were having a chat one day about his farming days in Rhodesia, and he mentioned to me that he lost all his implements, etc., and they were so limited with bringing funds out of the country. At one stage, they could only bring out like $100 if they wanted to go on vacation in South Africa. Now, how can you? That's not per person; that's per family. So it was just damn ridiculous. But yeah, it was just in a transit period kind of thing. But anyhow, Jim had a large amount of, or a reasonable large amount of Rhodesian dollars with him that he had smuggled out of Rhodesia when he saw that the things were going west. However, he could not exchange that into local currency because South African banks regarded the currency at that stage of being of no value. And that's where the adventurer in me surfaced, or shall I rather say the criminal in me. Because I told Jim I can concoct a plan to see if we can help. And converting his money into local currency. I told him about my plan, and Jim thought it was an excellent idea. I just told him, okay, well, should we run into problems and the money gets confiscated, it gets confiscated. I'm not going to be held liable for that. Jim agreed to that as well. Anyhow, Jim gave me the money, a couple of plastic bags full, and I set out on a trip to Gaborone in Botswana, and I checked in at the local casino. I could hardly contain my excitement. I had came up with a serious poker face when I saw that the casino indeed accepted Rhodesian dollars. So, of course, I exchanged some Rhodesian dollars into. I bought some chips, local casino chips with Rhodesian dollars at the converted exchange rate, blah, blah, blah. And I just bought enough so that I didn't, stirred up some suspicion. And I started to gamble, and of course, I kept myself busy. And at the end of the gambling session or whatever, when I thought it was a good time to pack up and go, I cashed in my chips, and of course, they gave me Botswana Pula. And of course, the system was to be repeated the following day, but I would make sure that I would not go and gamble with one of the croupiers that I had gambled the night before, so as to avoid suspicion. On the Sunday, I checked out and I felt quite chuffed that I done pretty well. And I proceeded to travel back to South Africa towards Derdepoort, Zikane, the border post. And I went, of course, I parked and I went to customs inside, had my passport stamped, got back, got my check receipt or whatever from the customs people in the customs building to give to the guy who was operating the traffic boom. And I was traveling with a Volkswagen microbus, minivan. And the boom was already lifted. I already had given him my pass to leave, and he'd already lifted up the boom, when he saw when this guy operating the boom saw my what do you call it, my attaché case, briefcase between the two seats, and he said to me, "No, I must open that." He wanted to look inside. I said, "No problem." So I opened it up so that he can see. When I opened it, my blood froze because a week or so before I had collected my mail in Falwater, and I had call-up papers for military duty for a 3-week camp. So here, this guy, I opened my briefcase for him, and right at the top is this brown envelope with the bloody military stamps, and I knew I was in serious trouble. The guy looked at me and said to me, "Oh, so you're a member of the military, South African military. Ah, what is your purpose of your visit to Botswana?" And there was no time to think out a lie or come out with some story. He said, "Oh," and he interrupted himself. I said, "Oh, yeah, a couple of weeks ago, you guys in South Africa did a military raid into Lesotho. And, because they supported the ANC. And so you must be a member of the South African reconnaissance team or whatever, doing a scouting into Botswana to see what was going on. So you're planning something similar into Botswana?" He says, "Come with me, soldier boy. You are under arrest." And I did not know what to do. And I just sat there. But he was leaned halfway into the vehicle. Luckily, I did not have my safety belt on yet. So as I was sitting there, I just leaned towards him and grabbed him by the shirt, the front of his shirt, pulled him with my left hand towards me, and with my right hand boxed him as hard as I could right between the eyes, which sent him flying. And of course, when that happened, I just started my car, and screeching tires and smoking wheels and whatever, took off towards the South African side. South Africans on the other side saw this commotion, and some of the police guys were already weapons drawn, ready to shoot, on their knees, aiming at this approaching vehicle, me. And I just steered with my knees, and I had my hands up in the air and steered the vehicle with my knees. And stopped when I got to within talking and shouting distance. And to make a long story short, I said, "No, no, no, I'm friendly. It's our people. I'm friendly people." And the guys, and I explained to the people what had happened, and my briefcase was still there, with the envelope and whatever, with my military call-ups papers, and they were satisfied. I was not busy with some BS story. But then the guys told me, he says, "I was very, very lucky, or that I acted the way I did, because a couple of months before, under similar sort of conditions," they didn't tell me what, "the guy was arrested and he was locked up, and his wife was only allowed to see him once a month over weekends, I assume. And when she saw him, they were only allowed to communicate in English, so that the Tswana people could understand them." Well, that was it. Long story short, shaking hands and trembling hands and whatever, I left and I weighed my way home.
And your buddy was happy?
Oh man, yeah. But that was rough, man. That was a scary couple of minutes. But I can tell you, wow. I told myself, okay, I'm good. I'm going to South Africa. Cleared the border, but it will take me some time before I go to Botswana again, just in case, just in case. And it was during this time when I was still living on the ranch, I decided to qualify myself as a professional hunter and safari hunting outfitter. And myself, Bossy Jacobs, and a friend Helmut Lesman went into partnership and we started the business Manamani Hunting Safaris. Now, starting a hunting business is no easy accomplishment because if you go to trade shows, etc., over in the United States or in Europe, the first thing that a prospective client wants to know from you or have from you is references. Now, how do you start out if you don't have references? And vice versa, six of the one, half a dozen of the other one. And this led to many unethical practices. And the only way you could do something was, the ethical way was to work for work for an established hunting outfitter as a freelance hunter. But do not try to steal their clients. Rather, tell these clients straight up, look here, I am working as a freelance hunter for this company. You are not my clients, you are his clients. When you are going to your own trade shows and people ask you for references, give them references. Give them the names of those people that have hunted with you. But be honest. Tell them you were starting out. You are starting out. Those are XYZ clients. It was not my clients. But I conducted the hunt for XYZ safaris. And I'm thus using this as references. I'm not stealing their clients. And it just so happened that there was a trade show for the Professional Hunters Association arranged at Sun City in November '87. And I can't remember if Helmut and myself had already broken up hunting together or what. I can't really remember. But I know I was the only one that was available to do that trade show. And I was at the show, I put up the booth, etc., etc. And the morning of the 11th November, I got a call from Tia with the very sad news that my dad had passed away the night before. And I was shaken up, of course. I knew that my father was ill. The first time he got cancer was when I was just a little pickaninny of 3 years old. The second time I was in high school in my final year. And the first time he got cancer, they removed something like 7 or 8 feet of his duodenum. In my high school years, matric year, they removed 2/3 of his stomach. And now this was the third time that he contracted stomach cancer, but this time he lost. He lost the struggle. Anyhow, and there I was. What now? The show was supposed to start in 2-3 hours. And a very professional colleague, and to this day a dear friend of mine, came up to me. He says, "Get in your car, go back home, go and help your mom with funeral arrangements. I'll take care of your booth." Francois Loupsher, you met him, he was here. He says, "I'll take care of your booth." And it so happened that his booth was just next to mine. He said, "I'll take care of your booth." And he did so. Of course, I was away for the whole day, came back the following evening. Went here, and Francois saw me. Says, what? And he told me, he says, no, here are all the business cards of the people that visited your booth. Each of them I gave one of your business cards. These are the people who visited your booth. You can contact them anytime, whatever. I didn't try to steal your clients. These are your clients. They wanted to consult with you. You make sure you get in touch with them. Now, I consider that to be the height of professionalism. And to this day, Francois and I are still good friends. He's not in South Africa anymore. He still hunts in Tanzania, but he lives in New Zealand now. But he acted in such a professional way. Now, yeah, no, I think Bossy and I were still together because just shortly after that, some way or another, we went on a marketing trip to Europe, and we found ourselves in Germany, in Hamburg. And I remember we wanted to see Astrid Schrocker. I can't remember the name of her business, hunting business. Yacht? No, I can't remember. But she was a very famous hunting safari booking agent. But it was weekend, and now we had to kill time until Monday before we could see her. And we were sitting in a bar. Hell, and very soon, we hardly sat down. Two lovely ladies wanted to know if they could join us. This is not something that Bossy and I were used to, so of course we were flattered. And you said, of course, by all means, come and join us. Would they like something to drink? Yeah, they would like to have. They would like some champagne. Naivete. So we ordered them some champagne. We didn't ask, for the price or anything like that. But we ordered the champagne, had a glass, and ordered a bottle, and after that they wanted some more, so we ordered a second bottle. To make a long story short, we should have known that it was a setup, but somehow we got a sniff in the nose that something was not that kosher. And of course, when we started questioning these girls, they lost interest in us and got up and left. And 2 bottles of champagne later, and those days it was the Germans still used the German mark. It was 500 marks per bottle, more or less 600 US dollars per bottle, And we just said, there's no way we're going to pay that, forget it. And then the guy came up to us and said, no, but you got to pay it. You should have asked what the cost of the champagne was. He says, otherwise you'll call the police. And Bossy had the sense to say, well, go ahead, call the police. He called his bluff. Call the police. And the guy a little bit hesitated a little bit. Bossy said to him, no, call the police. But we're not going to pay this. The guy said, but you have to pay this. He says, look here. Bossy said to him, if you're not calling the police, we're going to cause so much damage to your bar. It'll cost you more than the 2 bottles of champagne to make the repairs to your bar. And then this guy saw that, no, we meant what we were saying. And he started changing his song. And he introduced himself as Heinz Zemmler, the owner of the bar. And he told us, okay, well, this time you will make an exception, relax, get something else to drink, and this time the beer, the whatever will be on for his account. He wouldn't charge us for that, but anyhow, that was it. So, yeah. So this is our story. We saw Astrid Schrocker the following day and whatever. She actually sent us a lot of clients. But, with this damn thing of the professional hunting, ethical and unethical, those two words so often came into play during the course of a hunting safari or a hunting career. Then, but there was a big difference between what was acceptable when I was a young kid versus when I was a young man versus a mature guy like I am right now. What was ethical and what was unethical. I have to, I have to quote. I have no. I have to quote the words of a dear friend and colleague of mine, Colin Bell, who also said, that he had a Damascene situation in the sense that he also, when he started out in Botswana, supported trophy hunting, but very soon came to the same conclusion that this justifying of trophy hunting is absolute bullshit. Just like I've said many times. My professional hunters will always try to justify the hunting practices as it contributing to nature conservation, which is absolute bloody nonsense. If there's just a couple of a certain species left and you shoot one or two of them, how does that contribute to the protection of the species? It's nonsense. Lions. You shoot a lion. How long does you shoot a lion? Which lion are you going to shoot? That mangy one that doesn't breed anymore, or that top beautiful male specimen with the black mane? You're not going to shoot that. You have your client shoot that mangy thing and have him take pictures of that mangy thing. You're going to shoot that top specimen. What happens now is you shoot that, besides the conflict of interest right there and then, having done that, shooting the beautiful one, the females will now go into estrus when their babies are killed. Excuse me, let me put it this way. That with the male now gone, another male will join the pride. He will kill the remaining babies or young babies, the previous male's babies, and the females will come into estrus again. Now, all those babies are wiped out. Now, how long does it take for those baby females to get pregnant again, bear male lion cubs, which have to grow up and join or form their own prize? The whole cycle is, the clock is turned back 6-7 years. It's absolutely, absolutely, absolutely bullshit. The lion hunting and trophy hunting and the way it's justified. Let's look at elephant hunting. They only shoot the old ones which are not part of the breeding cycle anymore. That is nonsense. You're going to shoot the best, beautiful, large elephant bull you can get for your client and have those pictures taken of this wonderful trophy animal. You're not going to shoot something that has broken tusks or inferior tusks or anything like that. Which professional hunter would go and brag with pictures like that? There's another thing that I wanted to bring here, that I wanted to bring to your attention. Okay, that's elephants. Yeah, shooting elephants. Now, the other thing about lions or leopard hunting, that bugs me is the way lion and leopard hunting is done. It is done by dragging a carcass of whatever antelope it is, or a buffalo, all over the show, hoisting it into the air, and then building a mashand, which is a platform in a tree about 20, 30 feet into the air in a tree, maybe 50, 60 yards away, and you shoot those lions when they come and eat on this carcass that is hoisted into the tree, and you shoot from this platform with a spotlight. That is hunting. That is not hunting. That is shooting. So often, and I quote Derek Hubert now, him and his wife Beverly have done so many movies for National Geographic. Derek recalls times when he started out in his safari career, photographic safari career in Botswana, of having heard stories in the pubs of people dragging a goat or a duiker and tying it to a tree, and this thing is still alive and bleating and whatever, and a professional hunter and his client would be hiding behind the blind and then shoot this leopard when it comes to kill this tied up goat or duiker or whatever the case may be. They call that hunting? Not me. And the worst of all is, we all did that. We all did that, but at least I came to my senses and I said, no more, no more, no more. And people who want to tell you that are hunting there, are hunting lions, hunting leopard, and they're telling you that they have not done it, they are lying. They are just straight out damn lying. Then, of course, you get the case like in South Africa where these so-called walking with lions, those lions are just immature damn lions. Fine, you go and pet them, you can walk with them, blah, blah, blah. Where they get too mature and grown up and get too dangerous, they are set out and released on small little bloody hunting paddocks, and people from abroad come and hunt them in a relatively small paddock. That is not hunting either. So trophy hunting, lion, leopard, elephant, I'm not even talking about rhino. Those days are gone and over. So many times I've seen, clients coming on hunts, and they will be maybe hunting the same species. The one guy will shoot a kudu, let's say a kudu. That thing is not even on the ground yet, and the client will run towards the animal and dig into his pocket, come up with a tape measure, just to see how does this kudu's measurements compare with the record book trophies. The damn thing is not even dead yet and already measuring his horns. It's not acceptable. Not acceptable. One other very important thing is, okay, let's look at tourist dollars. An elephant, okay, figures change throughout the years. When I wrote this, the going rate for a trophy elephant bull was maybe $50,000. That was what a trophy elephant bull would bring in if collected by a client, $50,000. One time, once. Now tell me that in photographic safaris, that same elephant bull, over the span of many, many years, by how many safari goers, safari participants, can that elephant be viewed? by dozens and dozens. And they all pay hefty fees for that safari. So on a photographic safari, that elephant bull makes many times over in tourist dollars than that elephant that would have been the victim of a trophy hunt. You know, I can get back to what Derek Hubert said, that he also witnessed stories in bars of, in those early days, maybe in the 60s or 70s or whatever the case may be, of professional hunter XYZ that was nicknamed Professional Hunter or Mr. Matches or whatever. They would actually set alight certain areas, reeds, to flush out sitatungas so that their clients can shoot them as those sitatungas flee the fire and smoke out of a reeded area in a riverbed. Lions would be wounded and the lion would be hunted, and they would just shoot dozens and dozens and dozens of shots into that bush, trying to flush out that lion. Meantime, they would just kill and wound other members of the pride that were also hiding in those reeds. It's just terrible, man. The way that they did it just is not right. Now, to get back to my personal experiences with trophy hunting industry, the biggest setbacks I suffered was my extended periods of time that I was away from home, especially when I worked in Zambia, and to a certain extent in Mozambique. But let's just focus on Zambia. The prime hunting time in Zambia was from May all the way through October. So all that time, May through October, I will be in Zambia. November, I'll be home, but December, Christmas, I'll be gone over to Europe or to January shows, either Safari Club International or Yacht on Hund or other shows in Italy, Brescia, whatever the case may be. I was just never at home.
This is a good breaking point.
No, just about. This took a toll on my marriage, as I missed witnessing my children growing up, seeing, that I was away from home for such extended periods of time, being abroad, with the trade shows, in between trade shows, after trade shows, I'd be visiting clients. And of course, I would be treated like royalty because all these clients that I would be visiting were all well-to-do people. Hence, my wife talking about my Hemingway lifestyle.